Good afternoon, Acting President, and good afternoon, Congress. It is an honour and a privilege to be standing here and addressing you for the first time. In the short number of months I have been here in Scotland, I have watched, listened, and hopefully learned a great deal about the Scottish education system. What I have learned is the important role the SSTA has in the future of Scottish education. As you may have noticed, that other election is now over. Unfortunately, it wasn't the way some of us thought it was going to end. But the real election begins now. The Scottish Government election in 2016 is the real election for us in terms of shaping the future of education in Scotland. Our association must be part of that future and must be prepared to engage and convince all those who care about education of the future shape of education in Scotland. We in Scotland, notice I'm using the word we, have a very good education system. And I can say that without fear of contradiction, having worked in recent times in Northern Ireland and in England. However, we need to work to maintain and develop our system. Northern Ireland is also in a good place, but I am sad to say that education in England is in a sorry state. And I apologise for our colleagues from England who are here today. I'm also sad to say that it's unlikely to improve in the very near future. And after the election result last night, I think it's only one way it's going to go. It goes without saying, if you want to see what can happen, if you get complacent, unions take their eye off the ball, and the government is allowed to seek change for change's sake, then look no further than south of the border. In England, they have an education system, and it's worth stating this. I've said it on a number of occasions. I left England in 2005 to go to Northern Ireland, and when I came back to England last year, I couldn't believe how bad it got. Even though I've said that, probably you don't realise how bad it is. And if I just give you some examples of some of the things that go on in England, you can see that what we need to fight against. In England, they have an education system that gives an advantage to those who can afford to pay. Educational underachievement is not a priority in English schools, or not by the government, should I say, rather than the schools. The national curriculum has been taken apart. A narrow and restrictive curriculum that only suits the more academically able is now being put in place. An examination system that creates failure for most. An unqualified teacher workforce with low levels of pay for all. No GTC to protect qualified teacher status. Local authorities that have a responsibility for education but do not have the powers to control the schools. A public education system that's been starved of money. It also has more than 400 private supply teacher agencies who charge more than £200 a day, and the teachers, in some instances, receive only £50 for their day's work. We have one supply agency here in Scotland. Hopefully that will be the last. Schools and educational services have been outsourced to private companies, and the only advantage is for those companies to make a profit. A teaching profession that has seen its national pay and conditions washed away, where teachers do not receive the annual pay rise unless they're prepared to jump through increasingly higher hoops. And a teacher workforce that is demoralised by government, the inspection service, competition between schools, head teacher bullying, and ever-increasing accountability and workload. If England wishes to improve its education system, it needs not look any further but north of the border. The Scottish education system is a good education system and must be defended, but it must be prepared to adapt and change, and SSTA needs to be part of that change. There are still areas of in the education system in Scotland that need to be addressed. SSTA needs to have a clear vision and a commitment to address these areas. The future government of Scotland needs to see teachers as part of the solution and not part of the problem. The teacher in the classroom needs to be listened to and trusted to deliver the education system for the future. We need to be prepared to tackle child poverty and educational underachievement. Every child needs to see education as the way forward, and teachers need to lead and be given the support in meeting the needs of their young people in their classrooms. The announcement of £100 million over 4 years in early years is welcome by the Minister. But we said back to the Minister back in February that there are children and young people in secondary schools who need help now. Government must be committed to provide funds to meet the needs of these young people to meet their full potential. Further cuts in ASN and those remaining ASN teachers being deployed to cover teacher vacancies will not help these young people. It is necessary that all groups of young people that have barriers to accessing education are identified and supported throughout the education system. I'm particularly proud that the SSTA identified young carers as a group of young people in need of support, not only here today, but at the STUC a couple of weeks ago. We need a wide vision of learning and achievement, and the curriculum for excellence is moving us in the right direction. But it needs to be broad, balanced, flexible and inclusive. It needs to meet the aspirations of all our young people. The government's programme of developing the workforce is part of this process, and it will have an impact on schools and the work of teachers. Unfortunately, the cuts in education and the shortage of teachers have and will continue to create a narrowing of the curriculum. This will lead to some of our young people disengaging with education as a consequence, and the problems that will then create. Qualifications, it's worth mentioning. The successful introduction of the new qualifications was only achieved by the commitment and determination of teachers, such as SSTA members in schools. SSTA members have always wanted to do the best for the young people in their classes and went over and beyond to ensure that they didn't lose out. It would be wrong of government to rely upon this commitment in any future initiatives. The government must be prepared to listen and work with teachers, and in particular the SSTA, in all its future plans. However, I do have concerns about National 4. If we have qualifications, they must be of value. But we've heard of undue pressure being applied in some schools to achieve National 4 for all young people in their classes. Should the system demand that all students reach National 4, then the qualification and all the effort would be of no avail. The qualifications need to fit and teaching and learning, and not the other way around. And teachers' professional judgment must be respected and not tested at every opportunity. The recent drop in literacy figures could have been envisaged with everything else that teachers are expected to do. However, the government needs to be pragmatic, realistic in its analysis, and be prepared to prioritise its objectives in the coming years. All children need qualified teachers, and I reinforce the commitment of the GTCS to ensure that only recognised qualified teachers teach in our schools in Scotland. But the government must ensure that teachers have regular and meaningful and continuing entitlement to professional development. This must not be only to meet the needs of the schools, but the development of subject areas, but more importantly, the teacher's professional and long-term career development. The funds for professional development must be protected for all teachers at all levels, including supply teachers, if we want to deliver a professional and adaptable teacher workforce for the 21st century. There is a need for a sustainable education system to support schools with local authorities entrusted and responsible for schools. I fear that the recent decision by 4 local authorities to leave COSLA could open the door to outside agencies or trusts being given responsibility for schools. These bodies would not be under local democratic authority control and could threaten the whole education system in Scotland. I urge the 4 authorities not to play politics with education and return to COSLA and maintain a national education system with national pay and conditions. If they believe COSLA is not working properly, then reform it from within, instead of trying to score political points from the sidelines. We also need to consider the future. Should the current system fail to work for teachers and education, the possible reorganisation with a central education authority locally administered for Scotland. We haven't debated it, but we need to think about it. And it's one of those things that we have to think about sooner rather than later. Added to this is the new education bill, which will establish the role of a chief education officer in every local authority accountable for closing the attainment gap. Could this development be put more pressure on an already stretched school system, or could it be a move towards centralising of education? Government says education is the centre of government policy, but education needs increased funding to end the downward spiral of education funding. It must be expanded, expand the school building programme to allow the best facilities for our teachers and young people in an attempt to meet the future needs of the country. We also need to reinforce the fundamental principle of education being a public service and not to be run for private companies to make a profit. We need to resist the further privatisation of education as it's happened in other parts of the UK. We need to resist the introduction of private supply agency to meet the teacher shortage problem and any other attempts to outsource educational services. We need to make the teaching profession an attractive profession to encourage the retention of the high quality teachers we have and recruit the high quality people in the profession we need for the future. I emphasise the word retention. It's one thing trying to recruit your teachers, it's more important that you look to keep the ones that you already have. Unfortunately, the damage over the last few years needs to be undone and a number of areas still need to be addressed to deliver a high quality profession. Pensions, as mentioned earlier, the possibility of teachers retiring at the age of 68 will not retain or attract teachers. This added to the new increasing tax on pensions contributions over the last few years only makes things worse. It will end up with teachers working longer and receiving less. The possibilities of teachers reaching the full retirement age is diminishing. Maintaining a national pay and condition structure is threatened by the local authorities leaving COSLA. But COSLA and the government need to address the cuts in teachers' pay over the last few years and need to show commitment and reward teachers for the work they've already done and the challenges ahead. This must mean a substantial increase in pay in the coming years to retain and attract teachers. The SSTA has always recognised that supply teachers are an important and essential part of the education service. Schools are unable to function without this experienced professional group of teachers. Therefore, to retain and recruit supply teachers, SSTA seeks a restoration of the supply teacher pay levels, a national coordinated register of qualified supply teachers that are GTC registers, and a single police check for all supply teachers. In addition to that, an entitlement to continuing professional development. The last item I'm going to refer to is workload. Teachers need more time for teaching, not for more tests. However, the recent joint report by government, employers and teacher unions can potentially open the door for teachers' professionalism to be restored and tackle teacher workload. The document, which is long-winded, the Curriculum for Excellence Working Group on Tackling Bureaucracy Follow-up Report, which was published in March, is a very short and readable document, and it gives guidance to schools. And I'm particularly keen that we take full advantage of this document and make it work for us. It gives a guidance on assessment. Assessment should be based on professional judgment, and I hear what's been said about SQA not allowing teachers to make that professional judgment. It's something we need to deal with. Tracking pupil progress and moderation is important. However, it says in the document, there is no need for large folios of evidence to support it. We need to deliver on that. Forward planning should be proportionate. There is no need to plan, assess, record or report every experience and outcome. Planning should support professional dialogue rather than to fulfil an audit function. Monitoring and reporting. ICT planning and reporting systems should be used with caution. Just because such systems can support very detailed planning and reporting does not mean they should be used in that way. Self-evaluation and planning. Over-reliance on audit tick box distracts from quality teaching and learning. Teachers need to be allowed to focus on teaching and learning, and any activity that distracts them must be severely questioned. Therefore, we need to use this document to support the professional judgment of teacher and cut the relentless administration. That document, we've got posters on the back at the start of that process. We will be giving further guidance on how to use those in the workplace, and our intention is to make sure our members use it to their advantage and say no on occasions when they need to. As I said earlier, you may have noticed the other election is now over, but the real election now begins. That discussion is real and is happening now. I received a letter on Wednesday evening, the eve of the general election, informing me that the Minister will be setting out her vision for the Scottish education on Tuesday week. The SSTA will be there, making the voice of secondary teachers heard. So the debate begins. Thank you very much.
Congress to approve the report of the General Secretary, please.